What's going on, guys? Dan Marvosh here for All Systems Golf. I'm here at the beautiful Sterling Hills Golf Club in Camarillo, California. And today we're talking about the most common flaws that I see in high handicap players' short games. So we're going to specifically talk about your chipping stroke and why you still might be struggling with shots around the green. Okay guys, so today we're talking about the most common chipping flaws that I see amongst high handicap players. So what we're talking about is a chip shot where the ball is just a couple of yards off of the green. Oftentimes you have a little bit of green to work with, and we're going to get that ball up in the air, rolling like a putt, hopefully close to the hole. So the most common flaws that I see start in the setup, just like with anything else. So what I see is people will put the ball way back in their stance. They'll de-loft the club by putting their hands more forward, and they'll really feel like their pressure is way on their left side. And then from there, they feel like, okay, I'm just going to try and allow my hands to lead the club head, right? So you may have heard that before. So this isn't a bad technique, especially if you're a beginner golfer and you're kind of stuck on your right side and flipping the club up in the air, causing skulls. So when you put the ball way back in your stance and lean the handle forward, it de-lofts the club, but it also eliminates the bounce angle of the club. So bounce, for those of you that don't know, is the ability for the golf club to resist digging. Okay, so it's on the bottom of the sole, and that allows the club to sort of glide through the turf instead of digging straight into the ground. So especially if you're a player that hits way behind it and you see a chili dip where you have a club or a leading edge that's diving straight into the ground right behind the ball, and the ball's not going anywhere, chances are you do a lot of these things that we're talking about. Okay, so the other problem with putting the ball way back in your stance is that you're de-lofting the club. So when you de-loft the club, you're going to have a lot of overspin on your shots, and the ball is going to come out really, really low. Okay, so it becomes very difficult to control, especially if you need to add a little trajectory to your shot. All right, so starting with that setup with the ball back and the handle way forward, what I see a lot of is people will overhinge their wrists, okay? And oftentimes when you overhinge your wrists, in order to get to the golf ball from here, the only way to do that is to lean forward, move pressure forward, and then all of a sudden you get where the handle is way forward and you think you're going to hit the ground. So what do? You pop up, right? And so that kind of looks like this motion right here where we overhinge, we go down, we start popping up. Next thing you know, you've got this lead wrist and extension. You're flipping through the shot, and you're actually hitting the middle part of the ball instead of any part of the turf. Okay, so how do we fix it? Very important to start with any fix in the setup. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move the ball slightly forward, so more in the middle of our stance. And then whether you have pressure 50-50 on your feet, or you want to lean a little pressure onto your left side, I'm okay with either one. And then the main thing in the technique that we want to think about is we want to feel like we're taking the club back with a lot less wrist hinge. Okay, so to reiterate that to yourself, if you just set up with your feet close together and you press your palms together, which creates a triangle here, just go ahead and make a swing waist high to waist high. Okay, and notice that the point of the triangle isn't breaking down like this. Okay, once you get a feel for that, that will kind of help you, especially if you overhinge your wrists, right? So now that I have my triangle, I'm going to maintain that triangle, and I'm just going to rehearse this movement back and forth. Keep in mind you want to keep that pressure wherever it is at address, because if you start moving it back, and forward, you're going to change your low point, which is where the club contacts the turf. Okay, so once we have that, let's go ahead and do a few rehearsals. So again, we've got the ball in the middle of our stance. I'm going to have a little pressure forward, and then I'm just going to feel like I keep that triangle back and through just like this. If you want another drill, which you can do right now, go ahead and set up with the shaft or the grip end pointing at your belly button and a ball in the middle of your stance, and then just take the club back where there's not a lot of wrist hinge, go all the way to impact, replace the golf club and the shaft in the same spot it was at address. Remember, if you go back with no wrist hinge, but then add by pulling the handle and increasing your wrist hinge, you run into the same problem that we had with our earlier example and setup, okay? So once you kind of get an understanding of where that club needs to be at impact, for me, I feel like my normal swing wants to drag the handle a little bit, which is a common problem that I have where I dig the club into the ground because I'm not using the bounce. Okay, so now that I have that feel, so I'm just going to feel a little bit like my right arm kind of releases a little bit earlier instead of holds on. So now I'm going to hit a few little shots. Okay, and even if that one I hit 3 inches fat, because I'm using the bounce, it still ends up being a really good solid shot. And that's the importance of setting up correctly and then going into the technique. Once you guys have this technique down, let me show you how to practice this. So the best way I know how to practice anything is to work in isolation on the technique. So I'm just feeling good solid technique. You don't need a target for this. And then what I want you to do is just focus on good ball contact and just kind of pay attention to the way that it feels when you hit the club. So it's to feel very solid. If you hit the turf a little bit, it means you're using the bounce, right? Then the next thing you want to do is you want to take maybe like 5 or 6 golf balls and you want to work on different distances. Okay, so now that we understand the technique, let's apply it by doing different distances. Okay, and for different distances, the only thing I'm really going to do is focus on the same technique, but with a shorter backswing and a shorter follow through for a shorter target, and vice versa for a longer target, right? So I'm going to rehearse a shorter backswing and a shorter follow through with that same technique. Okay, and now I notice that my ball carries shorter, and you can see how it ran out and it didn't go all the way to the hole, which was my first couple of balls. Once you have that down, now it's time to put your new motion under pressure, which I call practicing the way that you play, right? So if we're playing, we're going to have a variety of different types of chip shots. It's never going to be from the same spot, right? So if you take 3 or 4 balls and you scatter them around the green, now I'm going to have a different shot each time. On the chipping green, you're going to have different targets. So what you can do is with those 3 or 4 balls that you've spread out around the greens collar is you can focus on trying to get maybe 3 of them out of 4 up and down, right? Where you chip it on and then you're able to make the putt. Okay, another thing that you can do is vary the different distances that you have, right? So I might have a few up close where this collar is, and then I might put a few back here, maybe even off of some hard pan. That way I can really experience some randomization in my practice and really kind of get the idea of all the different scenarios that I'm going to face on the golf course. So it's just as important for you guys to understand how to practice as it is to understand what technique you're doing. And remember, the most important thing that I can tell you guys is that you have to understand certain cause and effects of why you're not able to create certain patterns. And that's the issue that I have with a lot of training aids and potentially some drills, because drills don't always address the cause and effect, right? If you're a chipping motion and you're kind of like this, well, what's happening is you're trying to get the ball up into the air, and all you needed to do was get your setup correct where you had pressure forward and you keep it there, and then just use the bounce of the club. And after you understand that a little bit, your chipping technique's going to improve massively. So I hope that helps you guys out. Make sure and like and subscribe and share this video, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks again.